Welcome to the Road Home Podcast with Ethan Nichtern, author and senior teacher in the Shambhala Buddhist tradition. Join Ethan as he and his guests explore the Buddhist path as it relates to art, culture, activism, politics, Western psychology, and more. If you'd like to support Ethan's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Ethan.
Hi, everybody. This is Ethan Nichtern for the Road Home Podcast. Quick note before we get to the 9th episode with Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, I would love to just invite everybody to check out something new on my website for 2019. Starting January 22nd, I'm going to be leading online Buddhist studies course for the entire year, a 40-week course divided into 5 8-week sections, so you could just start with an 8-week course. It meets live every Tuesday nights via the Zoom platform, but you can also listen to the recordings after the fact. And the plan here is to try to give you a very in-depth, very practical, and occasionally geeky overview of Buddhist thought in 2019 language and usage. And it should create a really great online sangha of people coming together all over North America, maybe all over the world, and who want to practice meditation and solidify or reconnect with a daily meditation practice, and want to study Buddhism from a wide variety of angles. Obviously, I'm a teacher in the Tibetan and Shambhala traditions, but we'll try to bring in also some Western psychology, some neuroscience, some evolutionary biology, maybe a little bit of the spiritual ceremony in Buddhism. So this is a great way to start or deepen a practice or just have a weekly sangha to geek out with. So if you want more information on that, you can check it out on our website, ethannichtern.com. If you don't know how to spell my name, you should just look at the podcast that you downloaded and check it out. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Okay, now on to the wonderful interview with Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, one of my favorite Buddhist teachers and co-authors of Radical Dharma. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Road Home Podcast. This is Ethan Nichtern, and I think I can say this honestly without it sounding just like nice talk, that I'm here with one of my favorite Dharma teachers, Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, and we're cross-coastal today. And first of all, it's like winter here in New York in mid-November?
Well, I'm sorry for you. It's not true for me. It's almost like it's as if we're entering spring here on the West Coast in Oakland, where I am.
Yeah. Well, so there's so much we could talk about. We could talk about the great book that you co-authored a few years ago, Radical Dharma, talking race, love, and liberation. But let's see, where are we? This isn't going to be up for a few weeks. So what recently happened? The U.S. elections happened about 9 days ago. What's going on for you right now, being a Dharma person and leader in 2018? Anything on your mind?
Lots, Radical Dharma was both a couple of years ago and yesterday. Radical Dharma was 9 days ago. I feel like the book, and more importantly, what the book is surfacing, speaking into, naming, is becoming more and more relevant in the same way that the awareness of our the racism that is deeply embedded in our policing institutions, and has become more. People have become more aware. So it's not that either thing is new. There's nothing being said in Radical Dharma that's new, but we're at a point at which we're more ready to hear it. The conditions create the opportunity for people to turn to something and pay attention to it in a way that I couldn't have accounted for. I thought maybe this amount of energy or awareness around it at the time we did the book, my co-authors Dr. Yasmin Saidullah and Lama Rod, when we did the book, we maybe thought, this level of awareness would come up about, 5 to 10 years later, um, not so quickly. And at the same time, we knew that it had to be out because it was needed and necessary. So that's really where I've been. I think it actually working through some resistance to the fact of that too.
Hmm. So Reverend, when you talk about sort of the that being very fast, that writing this book and trying to initiate or progress the discussion and awareness of race and embodiment and racism and oppression and marginalization in Dharma or mindful or meditative communities, that you're saying that happened fast, but at the same time, just to be devil's advocate, we're about 50 years post the first wave of like major Buddhist thinkers coming to the Western world. So I guess you could say there's maybe a counter argument that it's happened slow.
Oh, absolutely.
So why do you think race or oppression or other forms of embodiment and marginalization and political oppression, why do you think that was less a part of the Dharma conversation in, like, say, 70s, 80s, 90s? Do you have thoughts on what the structure was that caused that to not be part of the discussion?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the the primacy of whiteness as a construct and all of the privileges that ensue with whiteness left it as a space that's like a given. It's not interrogated. We didn't interrogate the nature of the sky because we took the nature of the sky as a given, as a known, as reality itself. And this, I think, is one of the significant challenges of this social construct, and I would actually say sociopathy that we refer to as whiteness in a kind of mild way. um, that really it is a del- construct that is made of a certain kind of delusion that doesn't even recognize itself as a thing enough to interrogate itself.
Mm.
And so as it happens, because of the realities of socioeconomics and supremacy and hierarchy and all of the things that the country was built, the very foundation of this country is built upon, the people that had the opportunity and experiences in order to be able to bring the Dharma to the West, including importing some of our, beloved teachers, and as well as going to motherland places to learn directly from those teachers and in those lands. Those opportunities were largely afforded as a result of the very same privileges. So you just don't interrogate the things that give you access and opportunity and rights and entitlements that are otherwise not afforded to other people. And in fact, your own rights and entitlements are at great cost to those other people. There is no reason, with the ways in which the structures of society continues to reinforce that delusion of, my world is the world, the way in which I understand myself and my location in that world is not to be interrogated, because everything around me is reinforcing what I believe to be my view and the reality of things. It's peculiar because, the very value of the Dharma is to interrogate everything.
Right.
Name of the book, Radical Dharma.
Uh, that's a wonderful answer. I've also thought that it's that I do think the Western world really needed Dharma teachings in terms of a examination of consciousness, all of these different spiritual and psychological tools, but also it seems like Eastern Dharma in some ways also needed certain elements of the Western world. Like, for example, like there was never in Tibet, for example, or democracy was not an institution. So the idea of people collaborating for social change or exerting their voices for social change wasn't part of the discussion. It also seems like there's a real, I wonder if you would agree with this because there's different traditions, but there is a real emphasis psychologically or spiritually on an individual consciousness or an individual being examining themselves just within the location of who they are as a distinct being in a lot of Dharma teachings. That I wonder if that's also makes it hard to look at the interdependent or social constructs or location that individual exists within. Do you is radical Dharma? I guess what I'm asking is, are the teachings of radical Dharma in classic Dharma, and did we just miss them, or is this a Western offering to classic Buddhism?
I think that the West has certainly made particular offerings. I think that but it has always been there. And I think what elucidates it from the Western perspective is the prevalence of more peoples that are not of a hegemonic culture or birth, or we're seemingly all united, from the United States. We're seemingly all United States of Americans, but at the same time we're not, right? And that's unusual in the history of the Dharma, to have itself located in a place in which there's not a hegemonic culture that is taken for granted. I say that it's there, though, because at the same time, we know, for instance, in Sri Lanka, when socioeconomics divided people, that there were pushes for movements like, Sarvodaya, that I believe is the name, that pushed for a recognition of the ways in which the Dharma was not being used appropriately to interrogate class distinction and caste distinction, in the case of Bhimrao and Bedkar. So I think that the teaching is always there. And I think what's also always there is the impulse of people that are located in dominant or hegemonic locations in society to um, um, carefully avoid interrogating their own their own locations. Is so there's something that's quite human about that, right? To not interrogate the place that you're standing, but interrogating the how rather than the what. You know what I'm saying? And so a lot of emphasis on, and forgive the terms, the epistemology rather than the ontology. And we forget that the constructs here in America have created an ontology, a way in which we view reality as it is, not just how we're doing reality, which is what the consciousness conversation is about, right? Like how are we doing our reality? How are we relating to reality? But with an agreement that there's a reality. It's a kind of hidden agreement, like that this is the reality. And I think that agreement in some ways makes sense in cultures that are hegemonic in terms of culture, cultural background and orientation, and also B, themselves were communal based cultures, and so it made sense to turn the attention onto the individual, because you turn the attention onto the thing that's not getting attention. So it made sense that the Dharma has historically turned its attention onto the individual, because it came from cultures that were by nature and design were communal. We, on the other hand, are in a communal, in a stunningly individualistic culture. So it actually makes sense that where we would turn the attention, so the Dharma, the skillful means of the application of the Dharma, is to say what's needed in this case, not to say what's needed in Tibet, right? What is needed here in this context and in these conditions, and in this context and in these conditions, we are called to by the Dharma, by its application, by its instruction, to say, oh, what is not being paid attention to? What's not being paid attention to here is how does our collective reality have an impact on our liberation?
Yeah. So, in terms of allowing this conversation to progress, I mean, I'm going to ask probably what could be the most obvious question, so I don't want you to take it that way. But in terms of the three of you getting together as comrades and scholars to write this book and then move this work forward, and thinking maybe the conversation would progress in 5 or 10 years, and seeing it happen a lot quicker than that. What do you think has allowed the acceptance of these teachings and this conversation to happen much more quickly? I mean, I can think of a one person name that may bring that out, but I'm thinking of something larger maybe.
Yeah, I want to say that you could talk about the one you might refer to as the name. We refer to as a number, so we just say 45. In terms of that's an energetic field to me, right? So 45, the current president of the United States of America, represents to me an energetic field of something that was already there, right? And it's the coalescing or the cohering of an energetic field. And that energetic field is the energetic field of dominance, expressed in this particular, so dominance is everywhere, but expressed in this particular society, in this reality, as white supremacy, as a nationalism, an exceptionalism, as a patriarchy, and the law of patriarchy as the law of all things. It expresses capitalism, right, and as the imagination stealing organization of our economic exchange, and dare I say our commonly held religion in this country. So I think that what has happened, paradoxically, as I speak about privilege, is precisely the fact that people of privilege, that are accustomed to their privilege, that are accustomed to their sense of entitlement and the right to their way of believing and understanding what this country is and about and what it is not about. Dog whistles are there, but they're dog whistles, they're silent, they're meant to be there. But when the dog whistles became blaring bullhorns, sounded from the bully pulpit of the highest office of our society, you had many people that were not accustomed at all to their sense of entitlement to their worldview and their understanding of what this country is supposed to be about, assaulted, and they cannot stand for it. Mm. So in many ways, it is those of us that are accustomed, we're like, yeah, okay, what do you expect? Right? We're accustomed to that dude expressing himself on a daily basis in our lives.
Right.
He exists for all of us in all sorts of ways. It's almost humorous if it wasn't so painful. I think many people of color, many marginalized folks, many queer folks would be in a corner laughing and say, yeah, try that because now you got a taste of what we've been living with. But we're accustomed to it, and because we're accustomed to it, the level of reactivity to the reality of that energy field being so overt, we don't have as strong a reaction in many ways. Those of us that are marginalized, even though the impact of that this reality, the current reality of the administration, befalls those of us that are marginalized in much more significant, burdensome ways. But because the people that sit in seats of privilege, imagine yourself, right, has your belief affronted, your sense of decency of how it's supposed to be. This is how it's supposed to be, and to have that affronted in such egregious ways, with such persistence, I think assaults your deeply embedded sense of entitlement to having a say. And so both the rising up and pushing back against it, but also the clamoring for a way to understand, how did this happen to me? How did I participate? How did I become a part of this and not see this coming like this?
Right. I'd also say, for me as a as a cisgendered hetero white male, probably more politically progressive than some in that category. What 45 brings into the forefield is the relationship between the belief in earned privilege and unearned privilege. Right. I think there's, and I think this goes along with holding to some of those more individualized interpretations of Dharma or Buddhist teachings, right? So there's one version of this that you say, to be a privileged person, or to have wealth, or to have recognition, or to have greater safety or greater support, that there are certain karmic acts over a long period of time that an individual person goes through to develop the privilege or the structure of, from very classic Dharma terms, like living in a higher realm. And um, that that mythology of some kind of individual decency, or individual work effort, that's like, well, at least I earned what I got, is so affronted by a person who, clearly lies, cheats, and steals their way through everything, and that it makes you call into question, like, maybe the factors which brought about my relative success in the world are uh, a lot more complex, and a lot more nebulous, and a lot more manipulative than I thought they were. So, he's the mirroring aspect of Trump. Like, even though I disagree with him on everything, I can see that it's like, oh, I could do some of those things and not be called out on them. And maybe I have been doing some of those things in smaller ways, even as a well-intentioned Buddhist teacher. Maybe I've Trumpified my world, and maybe that's why I've received some good benefits on a superficial level. So he really is. There's a mirror check to just how much of a funhouse mirror he actually is for especially the straight white male. I think that's my interpretation. The other thing I've noticed, I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to ask you this because we're both on social media a fair amount of the time, and I have noticed that there's this desire to the way Buddhist people kind of troll on Facebook comments, or um, uh, on Instagram or Twitter or something like that, is they usually, if you talk about some specific suffering in the world or some specific cause, they usually want to either go back to the general, or talk about the specificity of the side you're taking, right? To say, I'm like voting for this person against that person, as some kind of dualistic um, approach, which needs to be let go of. And one thing I've noticed, and I'll just say this, is I would say before Trump's election, the percentage of people who were doing that on my feed, who were or seemed to be white male embodiment, I would say was around 80%. And now I would say that after Trump's win, it's gone up to maybe like 95 to 99%. It's very rare that even a woman will talk about emptiness or non-duality when we're talking about like a really specific thing, like let's get people to vote or something like that. And so I wonder, like, that's related to this whole concept of spiritual bypassing. Um, do you think, I guess what I'm saying is, in what ways are the teachings on emptiness or non-duality that a lot of us seem to want to retract into, in what ways are they not that helpful right now, I guess, is my question? Because you're obviously a Zen teacher with a lot of experience in other lineages. So emptiness is a big contemplation for you, I imagine, as well. But it just seems like so often people use emptiness and non-duality in a really unhelpful way. And I have noticed on social media, it's almost always the white male who does that now.
Yeah, it's almost I say this really with respect and a kind of filial love. It's humorous actually, because it's so telling of a lack of understanding of the conceptualization, because it's only a conceptualization of emptiness. It's not emptiness itself. to talk about that. So first of all, who is it that has this challenge with the discourse? There's two questions I want to know immediately. So who is it that's having this conversation at all?
Right.
Right? Who is it that objects? Is that entity not empty? And the other question I want to know is, what would you consider not included in the Dharma? What do you think exists outside of the Dharma? So I just leave people with those two questions
Right.
as a point of Dharmic reflection.
Right.
That said, the understanding of emptiness is that things are not empty. It's never said that things are empty. They are empty of inherently empty of self nature. That is to say, it is things are always in relationship. It's not to say that things are simply empty. They're not just empty. They're empty of a nature that is not composite of all other things. And one could say that everything is full, therefore. Everything is full of everything else, is the way you could understand the concept of emptiness better than to hold on to a word in English that doesn't appropriately communicate the refined nature of what emptiness is meant. I often tell people that in Japanese, the character that is used for emptiness is translated is ku, as is sounded as ku, and it's the ideogram is sky for sky. So would you say the sky is empty?
Mm.
Or would you say that the sky is boundless and inclusive of everything? That's what emptiness means
Right.
in the Dharmic way. It has no self nature. It's not composed of something that is not inclusive of everything else that is arising at every given time, which includes identity, race, gender, sexual orientation, like, capacity, ability, all of those things. So it's always inclusive of those things, not those things all left aside. That's what emptiness is pointing to, that we are a result of all of these things mutually co-arising and existing all in the same space, effervescently falling away at the same time.
Mm.
So I'm never just female, I'm never just Black, I'm never just queer, I'm never just temporally able, I'm never just anything. I'm never just of this time or of just this place. I'm all of those things, and they're constantly arising and falling away. Thus, to try to capture any one of those things individually and reflect on my small s self as just that is fallacy and delusion. That is what's empty. The ability to capture oneself as one singular idea, concept, ideation, construction is completely empty in that sense of it's not capturable, because one is always full of everything,
Mm.
full of all of the things that are arising and falling away. I am my 48-year-old self as much as I am my 12-year-old self, unfortunately, at times. I am just as much self-identified as Black as I am reflective off of all of the ways that I've been immersed in whiteness my entire life.
Mm.
I am of this time and I am of no time.
Mm.
That is how I'm empty. But I am full also of this identity that is reflected off of the multiplicity of identities, both known and unknown to me. So it expresses a real lack of understanding of the conceptualization of emptiness or shunyata, as well as is lacking self-application in the very moment that it's even conceived to put the question out there.
Hmm.
So even the misapplication of it is not applied. So it's misapprehended, and even the misapprehension is inappropriately applied in the fact of even making the inquiry or pushing back about against the concept itself.
Right. Well, when I was first studying Buddhist philosophy and studying the Madhyamika or middle way school, which talks about, the limits and absurdities of conceptual labels and how you get to releasing those. That was what you just said was at the beginning of that brilliant explanation of emptiness. Was the thought that I already had, which is who is having this conversation? Who's saying this? Like the idea that a philosophical idea can be decontextualized from specific people who are holding the concepts in their mind with specific power dynamics in the world is problematic, right? That there's no such thing as a self-existing concept either. So, but I wonder also,
no such thing as even the fact of that particular body, and drawing the question, the inquiry to begin with, is an expression of emptiness, as in the boundlessness of they are as a result of their identity, claimed or unclaimed, to even formulate such an idea. Which is precisely why 95% are white men, right, that are actually seeking to defend their identities using lack of identity to defend identity, when the question could only arise out of identity itself.
Yeah. Is that a basic Dharmic concept that usually the times that we are being the most self-defensive are the times that we're trying not to talk about ourselves at all?
I think that's exactly right. You can always say, like, wherever the rub is, there your teaching lies. Wherever the inquiry, there is the teaching. That's what you interrogate.
So I know you work with many different audiences, and I wonder, just I shared an experience of getting a little bit of pushback, and perhaps sometimes it's the thought arises in my head something like, dude, come on, as a level of irritation. But do you find that you get pushback actually directly to you in different communities? And you seem like an incredibly strong kind of, like, if you're going to come at Rev Angel, you better be precise, is my my view on it. But do you enjoy pushback, or is it irritating? Is it saddening? Is it like, okay, let's dance? How do you feel?
Totally enjoy it. So for those of you that know the Enneagram, I am an 8. And 8s are called the boss or the leader, or all sorts of things. So I love the feature of the 8s is that they thrive on pushback. So I thrive on pushback, and yes, you better come with it, right? The harder the better. I actually invite it all the time. I'm not sensitive. I'm not fragile in any way. And I think it's good for us. And I think any Dharma teacher worth their shorts has got to invite pushback, so that people don't, as an act of compassion, so that people don't run around and have this narrative in their head. Well, they can't really handle the real question. I didn't ask them the real question. I want the real questions. Go, dig deep. Bring it. that great scene in The Matrix where Keanu Reeves does that little gesture with his hands. It's like, yeah, bring it, because only if we interrogate, and only if we as teachers are willing to bear um, the force of the interrogation. If we have this sort of like coddled relationship where people are respecting us, quote unquote, respecting us so much that they're not willing to get down to the depth of their questions. There's going to be these idle questions. There's going to be these questions that are just there to try to irritate or to try to trip you up. But what I believe is that underneath all of it, is a really deep desire, a yearning into this question. Is liberation possible for me?
So right now, because when this airs, we'll still be in this post-election phase. Are you feeling, as a spiritual thinker, as a spiritual leader, are you feeling optimistic about the United States of America?
I feel both things. I'm classically Zen, both absolute and relative. I feel optimistic about humanity, and I feel just devastated on a daily basis about how we're going about this business of humanity. I think in terms of the elections, I feel a sense of relief from the perspective of a little bit of mitigating of the damage that befalls people as a result of these, horrific policies, and the long game that Republicans are good at, that progressives and Democrats seem to be horrific at, that is projecting into decades of policy and the ways that society is structured. On the other hand, so I'm grateful for the mitigation. On the other hand, I think the real groundswell, the real opportunity, and some people may have heard me sort of dabble at this here and there because it's actually the topic of my next book. The real opportunity, I think, is that people realize how flawed this is, how flawed this system is. It's not that it's not working, it's that it's working as it was intended. And look at what we've got. And I think people are much readier than I have imagined would be possible so quickly for a different system. I think that people are headed towards the point at which we realize how absurd it is to continue to have these outrageous battles fighting over the interpretation of an utterly flawed document, a document that is no longer timely, no longer relevant to the reality of who it is that makes up America. And that, frankly, if the reason that there's a winning at all, if you want to say that there's a conservative right winning that's happening, it is to the degree that we continue to invest in our agreement in the idea that the Constitution is a worthy document around which to base all of our rights and responsibilities in this country. So the moment that we say that is not the playing field, because that playing field, with all of its hopes and promises, from the beginning had no intention, including most of us that are on the other side of trying to scrape back some rights and pull for some potential to be recognized. Just get off that playing field is my thing, right? Like, say, this document is fundamentally flawed. It is not up to the task of meeting the plurality, the multiplicity, the potential, the possibility of our collective dream to be a nation that is truly inclusive, if you believe in nations at all. I don't believe that either, but for the sake of arguments, a nation that is truly welcoming of people in the expressions of their faith, their non-faith, their lack of duality and dichotomy around gender, around race, around all of these things that are stuck in exactly the realm that Buddhism is so well situated to probe and to interrogate duality. We're stuck in duality and dichotomies. And if we could allow for the release of them into that emptiness, right, into that boundlessness of multiplicity, myriad expressions, the 10,000 things as one nation under gods and goddesses and Buddhas and simply humanity. That's how we're going to get there. We're going to stop agreeing that this is where we invest our hopes and dreams, because the document was never intended for us, and so it is a radical act of honesty and truth and integrity to say that this document can no longer serve us. I call that a new America.
Has anyone asked you? I've been asked a few times this year when I'm running for office. Has anyone ever asked you that?
No, I think that they know better than of all the things. You know, I am deeply invested in. I'm not an ist. You know, I joke that I'm an un-Buddhist. I'm a liberationist, if anything.
That's so Zen of you, Rev.
I know. I try not to even be that, you know, but it is, I'm a liberationist. I realize that I don't have much. I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for the language that is uniquely expressed coherently through Buddhist text, right? It's uniquely expressed coherently through Buddhist text. It's not unique to Buddhism. It's not only there, but it is uniquely expressed coherently as a body of work, if you will, a body of expression, a body of philosophical understanding. I am devastatingly in debt to the conceptualization of Zen as I understand it, through all of the challenges that it comes with to have received the teachings of, you know, of Japanese peoples, from Chinese peoples, from Koreans, you know, from India, through a white person, through white people, and Latino as it is. I'm very indebted to them, but I don't believe that it is my responsibility to remain in debt. And so I liberate myself even from the teachings themselves, make myself, and thereby make myself available to the way that those same understandings are expressed in indigenous wisdom and in Black womanist liberation understanding that is not spoken through traditional text, it's spoken around the kitchen table, that's spoken through poetry, that's spoken through art, that is spoken through raucous, joyful, you know, hangout sessions with your peeps, where you discover yourself and become more of who you are and become more enlivened, and there's not a Dharma text to be found. But in the lived experience of who we are, allowing ourselves to unfold completely into our truth.
So maybe this is a good last conversation for this conversation, last topic. And I've wondered, have you thought about what maybe not ideal, but like a basically good and functional meditation or Dharma community might look like, let's say 20 years from now? Are there any, in terms of the different hierarchies, the different relationships between student and teacher, what the empowerments of the Sangha or community look like? Do you have in mind sort of what, I feel like that's, you know, a question, as everything 2 podcasts ago, we had some of the younger Shambhala leaders, Dr. Shante Smalls, David Perrin, Arti Tajuja, on to kind of talk about the future of Shambhala. And, we talked about sort of how patriarchy needs to be questioned, and even the kind of what we took to be the cooler Asian patriarchies, uh, they've sort of are kind of collapsing right now in our community. So we thought about like what would a really well functioning like community, Dharma community look like, and we didn't get too much into that. I guess it's hard to imagine what the future looks like, but have you imagined the future of like what in the year maybe like 2038, like a Western this continent Dharma community could look like?
Yeah, what I have imagined is a framework that allows people to discover what that is for themselves. Because of what I think it will look like is not same, right?
Mm-hmm.
It will look not the same for different communities. That's what it will look like. And we're so bent on trying to get like a model that looks the same, and therein lies the trouble.
Mm.
Because it will look different if the community is lacking resources. It will look resource different if they are materially well resourced. It will look different if it arises with, as I think should certainly be a feature. I could suggest features, um, and that allow for a multiplicity of ideas, for um, the restriction of hierarchy in inappropriate places, and the flourishing of it when it is in service, and trying to figure out what that looks like is the work that we have to do. What I proposed is a framework, and we offered that in Radical Dharma Camp, which we are having 3 of this coming year, that helps people to discover that for themselves, because that's really what I think my role is as a teacher, quote unquote, all around that label, is to point people back to themselves. And so that means pointing people back to their individual selves, but also pointing people back to their collective experiences. I'm much more for collectives than I am for communities these days. And I think distinction is collectives, communities exist in service to something quote unquote greater than the members of the community, and collectives exist in service to the members of the collective.
Mm.
So I think we actually don't know how to do community, and so we should do collective for a while, which will create the conditions for empowering people enough for us to then fold back around to then understand what it is to do community from a way that is empowered, because we don't have enough people sufficiently empowered to be able to serve something quote unquote greater than themselves, because there's someone else that's already in power, has power, is accustomed to power, that's going to be determining what the greater than oneself is.
Mm.
So we first have to do, and this is the work of spiritual path, is that people talk about the ego and getting rid of the ego and destroy the ego, and we actually have to do real cultivation of a healthy ego before we are talking about destroying the ego. And this is a core aspect of a critical problem we have in Dharma communities, both Buddhist, yogic, all of them. Is everybody's like, yay, let's go and cut the ego. And that especially comes from people that feel like their ego is well served in the current conditions and realities of the society that we live in. So many people actually need to be positioned in the conditions created so that they are entitled and uplifted into the building of a healthy ego, including all of the things that contribute to that, in a material society, in relative society, which means being sufficiently resourced, able to, pay their bills and have meaningful work, to not have to live in communities, neighborhoods, I'll say, that where they don't feel that their children and families' lives are at threat, both by the vagaries of urban life as well as policing institutions and government institutions. Um, They need to have health care. They need to have self-determination above all else. And feel the sense of access to that. It doesn't have to all be complete, but people should have to feel entitled to that, and that is available to them as a fundamental grounding in order for them to even be able to make rightful decisions in a community in which other people have historically been endowed with a certain kind of material resource and power.
Hmm.
So we have to go back or turn right or left or whatever you want to call it, to turn back towards community. I just don't think we know how to do it. I don't think we're going to know how to do it for a long time to come. We're on a playing field that's so incredibly unlevel that before we agree to come back on that field, we just have to go. We have to level it all out. And again, that's not about some kind of perfected state where everybody has everything all together, but it is a sense of that this is possible for me. This is possible for me, and now it's my work to do, right? But my access to it is not inhibited by the structures that are historically, socioeconomically imposed, not imposed by the confines and limitations of an ontological reality that comes in service to a very particular set of people. And I'm forced to, at the very least, be bicultural, bilingual in order to survive the nature of that reality that is actually not mine. And I don't have the space or time afforded to me to discover what is mine, because that one is so all-encompassing and imposing, and because of its dominance and its location of dominance in society, I have to give in to participating in it just to survive. How do you have people make a decision? Where do you think, this is like saying, children can make decisions for themselves. They're under-equipped in the structures as they exist.
Right. Well, it's my only fear with all of that is, in addition to the in addition to the dominant culture and the centrality of whiteness and the privilege and supremacy trying to protect itself, my only other fear is that these Dharma lineages are so new in the West that they want to not protect their dominance, but at least protect their heritage, so that this is really feels like it's coming up in the Shambhala community now, that even though the tradition is less than 50 years old, that there's a real sense of like, we have to protect the history of this thing, and we can't be too flexible with the forms or the manifestations of it. So it really does feel like that rigidity is the enemy, no matter what.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's anathema to the deepest wisdom. It arises out of a lack of trust of innate wisdom. A real lack of trust of that the wisdom doesn't exist in the text. Somebody should go all watch, what was the third Star Wars? The final one?
Oh, the new what is it called? The Last Jedi, where the
Yeah,
texts are burned?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should all go watch that. And every Dharma practitioner should go and watch that. It doesn't exist in the text. It never did. Does it help? Of course it does. Of course it does. It helps, it facilitates, but it also becomes a form of entrapment and a form of enslavement of our minds, our hearts. Our sense of trust is enslaved to the notion of these texts. And we forget the fact that they arise out of the same hearts that exist right here and right now, and that it is the yearning for liberation, the certitude of of one's right to liberation, that produces all of this, what we now understand as calling our history and our heritage. We are our heritage. We are our heritage. And to the degree that adhering to the history, the lineage, the heritage, etc., obscures our understanding of that, they're already dead.
Mm. Mm. Well, I'm going to go ahead and really recommend everybody listening, if you haven't already, to pick up and read the book Radical Dharma. We'll also be using it in the year-long online Buddhist studies course that I'm
Wow,
using it.
fantastic.
But how, Reverend, just briefly, if people want to get more in touch with your work, what's the best way for them to proceed?
Yeah, in 2019, we're really leaning hard into not only offering Radical Dharma the real spaces to do the embodied work, because it's not just ideas. I think that's another place that we've gotten lost in our own practices of the Dharma. It's a lot of like from the neck up
Right.
practice, and we see that fall apart very quickly. Uh, and so it's really about deeply engaging the stuff that is in our body that's historic, that's current and historic and ancestral. We do that through 3 different formats of Radical Dharma. So come and check out my right now it's my website, and hopefully by the time the podcast is up, it'll be on Radical Dharma's website too. For people that are already in the work, Radical Dharma camps will be happening east and west and north of the border. So that'll be fantastic. And we're looking for a location south.
Mm.
Uh, those are meant to really not just to do the work, but it's for people to say like, okay, how do I apply this to my life, to my sangha, to my work, to my field, be the academy, education, psychology. We have many people that are applying the framework of Radical Dharma to their work, because it's not about me, and it's not about the book, and it's not about an idea. It is about how do we live it? How do we come to discover what it means to disarm ourselves from inherited ways, to deconstruct what about those ways, what belongs to us and what is not ours, and then to disrupt ways that inhibit liberation. That's what we should be up to. I hope people will join me in just getting up to that, and let's do it together.
I wish Radical Dharma camp existed when I went to camp.
Me too.
Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, it's always a real pleasure to talk to you and really to listen to how masterfully you synthesize various modalities, and you're a really good example of how gentleness and fierceness can mix together. And I just really hope you teach and practice and lead for a long time, and I really hope to have you back on the podcast and we can connect again soon.
Thank you. But can I say that my hope is that there will be so many leaders arising that I will put my teaching hat down much sooner than later.
Yeah, and then we can just hang out.
Then we can just hang out and chat. That's right.
Okay, well, hopefully not too soon. Let's take a middle path approach.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And thank you all your listeners too.
Okay, so until next time, this is Ethan for the Road Home podcast, and see you soon. Bye-bye.